I'm just waiting, just give it a couple of minutes for
Yeah.
people pinging in.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
I know Sandra's under a bit of time pressure.
Yes.
Okay, how are we doing? I think probably in the interest of time we should get going. So we've got a good number of important people online. So thank you very much, everyone. My name is Lawrence Slade, the Chief Executive of the Energy Networks Association, and very, very pleased to have so many super panelists with us this afternoon. And a special thanks to Sandy for joining us from across the other side of the Atlantic. And thank you for the early start. And I know you're under slight time pressures because it's also your financial results, I believe, today. So I'm in awe that you're doing a webinar before financial results. So they must be really good. So thank you very much for that, Sandy. And I think in the interest of time, rather than doing my full intro now, I'm going to hand over to you for your comments, and then we'll progress with the rest of the webinar. So I will now go on to mute and hand over to you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. It's really an honor to be able to share perspectives from the United States about how we're managing the energy transition, the headwinds that we're facing, and the groundbreaking opportunities that are presented by both technology and innovation. And I'm sure some of what you're going to hear today sounds very similar to the issues that you're facing in the UK. In the US, the electricity system is in the midst of a fundamental transformation driven by changes on both the supply side and the demand side. Electric generation is becoming less predictable and less dispatchable. Existing power plants are aging, their performance is changing, and requirements are shifting to ensure higher degrees of reliability under more extreme weather conditions. Utilities are bringing more clean and intermittent renewable resources online at a pace that we've never seen before. And at the same time, demand for electricity is changing. It's driven by customer preferences for cleaner energy resources, changing weather patterns, electrification of the economy, evolving technologies, and customer usage patterns. Demand is also significantly increasing throughout areas of the country, driven by economic and new business development. These changes in generation and load mean far greater complexity for grid operators and planners as we seek to make investments that balance system reliability with customer affordability and environmental sustainability. Modern society depends on a reliable grid as an essential resource for national security, human health, and a productive economy. It's at the heart of our systems for communications, healthcare, finance, transportation, food, and water supply. The grid assures access to our basic needs, and we expect it to be there when we want it and when we need it. Emerging technologies and digital solutions are opening new doors for us, while also changing the expectations of customers and our other stakeholders, including our regulators. As we continue this transition, which will include natural gas as well as renewables, we believe the role of transmission is undervalued. AEP owns, operates, and maintains the largest transition system in the nation. Today, nearly 23,000 megawatts of renewable generation across the U.S. is interconnected via AEP's 40,000-mile transmission system. The significant growth and demand on our system, in part due to the location and performance of that very system, is increasingly challenging to meet. In some cases, the demand of new customers seeking to connect to our system exceeds the amount of energy currently served by AEP in those areas. And in the race to capitalize on technological transformation, industrial customers simply aren't willing to wait for us to modernize our energy policies and system. The acceleration of the transition is causing bottlenecks, especially for transmission here in the US. Today, it can take 10 or more years to plan, permit, and build a transmission project. Without significant improvements over the next decade, the transmission system in the US may fall short of reliability standards that our economy requires, and that will result in higher costs to customers. In the US, we're working with our peers to drive changes in regulation and the adoption of public policies that serve as the enablers of the transition without compromising reliability and affordability that customers rely so much upon. The pace of transition has also caused regulators, our states and legislators at all levels, federal and state and local, to raise some red flags here about the reliability and resilience of the system. In the US, we find that public policies often conflict with regulatory mandates, and it's happening amid a growing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events and increasing cybersecurity threats. To protect the electric power system from these threats, our capital investments are increasingly focused on adaptation, resilience, and hardening of the grid. In addition, we're engaged in research and development activities that are industry specific to help us to understand how we can account for what the system might look like in response to climate and technology development. To better understand how existing assets and infrastructure will be vulnerable to climate, to identify what the adaptations are that we want to invest in to ensure resilience, and to understand how these adaptations will impact communities, equity, and justice. In the US, we have an industry research arm, you may have heard of it, the Electric Power Research Institute, with whom we as a single company invest more than $7 million a year on R&D, which includes climate resilience and adaptation. There's a current initiative called Climate Ready, which is developing a common framework to address the needs of the entire power system from planning to operations. This includes the ability to analyze climate and weather-related risks, evaluate impacts of decarbonization, assess system vulnerabilities, and inform efficient and effective resilience investments. The program involves a broad range of stakeholders, including utilities, state and federal agencies, national labs, university partners, consultants, and international partners. This organization, the Energy Networks Association, is among those who are participating globally. This collaborative approach will lead to a widely accepted methodology that can be consistently applied across various jurisdictions. And to support this work at AEP, we're working to establish a company-wide resilience governance framework. The plan will define risk criteria, mitigations, and investment priorities across all of our operating companies. And we have 7 companies operating in 11 states here in the US. In addition, our regulators have directed the industry to develop a new standard for transmission system planning for extreme heat and cold weather conditions over wide geographic areas. And we're incorporating climate and weather risks into transmission and distribution standards, as well as equipment procurement. We've already updated design standards to allow for higher ice loading on lines and poles that can withstand higher wind speeds in areas where those issues are increasing in frequency and severity. Responding to a changing climate requires a comprehensive approach that goes far beyond just cutting greenhouse gas emissions. Resilience, adaptation, and hardening of the grid are part of that. In fact, they're at the heart of it. We have to make the grid more resilient to be able to withstand more severe impacts and to safely expedite restoration when those disruptions are inevitable. And we have to do that while balancing customers' demand for clean energy, complying with clean energy mandates, maintaining stable, affordable rates, and not compromising on system reliability. But climate change is not the only threat to the power system. Cybersecurity is a growing risk, especially as the system becomes it creates more opportunities for threat actors to break through, requiring more vigilance than ever. The electric utility sector in the US is the most highly regulated for cybersecurity. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation's Critical Infrastructure Plan includes mandated standards that require controls, policies, processes, and accountability for protecting the bulk electric power system. Preparation includes prevention, but it also includes mitigation and recovery. Maintaining and operating an increasingly sophisticated and complex system presents many challenges, but also many opportunities. In the US, the electric power sector invests about $160 billion per year to modernize the grid and ensure that it operates safely and efficiently across all seasons and all geographic regions, while at the same time integrating new technologies and resources. Much like the power system in the UK, the bulk power system in the US is becoming more digitalized, able to manage two-way flows of power and data while integrating intermittent and distributed resources to meet customers' needs 24/7. We have to pay particular attention to reliability and affordability, and we continue to make that transition to clean energy. We're very confident that new technologies like long duration energy storage, small modular nuclear reactors, and green hydrogen, for example, will eventually catch up and fill the peaks to maintain this complex system. But in the meantime, that's where natural gas is going to play a very pivotal role. I'll close by saying that this is an exciting time to be in the energy sector. I personally have been in both the gas and electric side for more than 26 years. It's been the sweet spot of my career. There are incredible challenges that we face as an industry globally, but the possibilities are also enormous. We like to say that if you want to change the world, come work with us and help us make and lead that change. So I will pause there and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I think that was a tour de force on where things are over on your side of the Atlantic. So thank you very, very much for that. If you do need to shoot off, then please feel free to do so. We won't take it personally at all. But I think, as you say throughout your chat there are lots of similarities with the issues that we're facing over here, albeit maybe on a sort of slightly larger continental scale with your good selves to us, but certainly some very familiar thoughts there from you. Even over here, we have extreme heat occurrences as well as the storms that we're seeing today. So similarities, and I think it's great that network operators around the world are coordinating and trying to understand these things. And indeed, only this morning we were seeing a delegation from our equivalents in Australia. So I think it's really important these days that we keep these lines of communications open. So before we move on to the panel session itself, and I hand over to my good colleague Barbara, I just wanted to make some introductory comments. And since we're talking resilience around net zero, etc., and as unfortunately we have a major storm going through the UK at the moment, I thought it was probably worth my while doing a very quick update before some more general background to frame things around where we've got to with the storm. So so far today, the storm's arrived sort of yesterday afternoon. Our network operator members have reconnected 107,000 customers in what continue to be very, very challenging weather conditions. And bear in mind, we still have violent winds forecast to the end of the day, so these numbers will be constantly changing. And the critical thing here is that they are working to connect customers where it is safe to do so. So far, we have around just over or just under 20,000 customers without power. That was at noon today on the 2nd of November. One of the things that we very much are quite proud of, I think, is how network operators from across the whole of the UK and GB in particular actually pull together in these situations, and how we have teams coming from network operators up in Scotland and the Isle of Man, for example, were mobilised much earlier on this week to come down to the southern part of the country to be ready for action to help get people back online. That kind of thing, I think, is an illustration of how GB's network operators really do pull together in these times. And I think, around that, it just illustrates some of the challenges we have as we look forward to net zero and the periods ahead. Collectively, for example, our networks are investing some 43 billion in energy infrastructure over the coming years, and that's split out with 31 billion in electricity infrastructure over the next 5 years alone. It's also worth noting that in terms of contribution to the economy, if you like, or the overall workforce, that's some 45,000 people employed across the network sector. in GB, and that includes some 2,000 apprenticeships and trainees across the country. So it really does touch every part of our economy, if you like. And also worth noting that as we look towards net zero and other challenges, our networks are actually delivering some 13 different government targets taking place as we stand at the moment between now and 2035. So really integral to net zero and hitting those targets. And I think at this, what has to be a critical juncture when it comes to the transition to net zero, it's really important, if not incumbent on organisations like ours, to be really open with our policymakers and industry. As much as we possibly can, we need to identify the barriers we face and work out in the best possible way how we overcome those and how we deliver ultimately for our customers and make our networks as resilient as they possibly can be during periods of bad weather like we are experiencing today. And I said that teams across the country have been mobilised earlier this week because we saw the storm coming from meteorological services. And it's fair to say that we're preparing for year-round events. These happen in the summer now as much as they do in the winter. So it's an all-year-round thing. And I think we have to invest in that modern, flexible energy infrastructure. We've spoken about smart grids, energy storage and interconnectors, and the modernised gas system for some time. But those billions of investment that I mentioned earlier, that's delivering that. That's making it work for our customers here and now, and hopefully reducing those instances where supply does go offline. We introduced a couple of years ago the powercut105.com, the website advising customers what to do in terms of power cuts or supply outages. And of course, that's backed by the physical 105 telephone number itself, which operates around the clock. I mentioned the teams coming down from around the country. That comes under, and those of you familiar with the industry will know we love a good acronym. That comes under the NEWSAC acronym, which for those who want to try and figure it out, it actually stands for North, East, West, South Action Committee, or Consortium rather. And with operational leads from across the country. So these actions can be coordinated quickly and efficiently. And frankly, learning the lessons from other storm occurrences. We know we can always get better. So let's learn from those and let's make sure that every time we sit down, we pause and we look at what we could do better and how we can work better together. So these are now really important operations for us to learn from. Likewise, the Energy Innovation Summit we held in Liverpool at the beginning of this week with over 1,000 delegates was a great way of looking at how we can bring innovation forward right the way across our sector, whether you're looking at gas or whether you're looking at electricity. And to illustrate that, and I find this brilliant, but this is what we're now doing, that we can remotely tell, for example, whether a tree branch or any other debris is on a tree line, or on a power line, which obviously allows us to target where we're sending teams much better in a more efficient way. Likewise, we're using drones to help inspect power lines rather than having to rely on the more expensive helicopters in some situations. Likewise, across the gas network, we're using or testing the use of satellite imagery to monitor the system much more often and more effectively than we've been able to do. So we're really looking at how we can use innovation and how we can use new technology to really get a better understanding of how our gas networks and how our electricity networks at both a distribution and a national transmission level are operating, and how we can deliver that more resilient and efficient service to our customers. And I think it's sort of one of the things that we have to make sure of as network operators, that we always have the customer focused at the forefront of our minds, what we're doing to deliver that service efficiently, but equally what we're doing to make sure our vulnerable customers up and down the country are being serviced appropriately, and that we're getting services out to those people as quickly, as efficiently as we can, which is why, of course, we operate the Priority Services Register, and why many thousands of customers on that register will have been contacted over the last few days to alert them of the incidence of Storm Ciarán and what they can do to help prepare themselves and what to do if they get cut off during this period. But again, it helps us target demand to those who need it in the most urgent fashion. We run every year a full service, a full campaign around the winter. We are also now, it won't surprise many of you to hear, looking at how we do this for the summer, as well as storms start hitting us all year round. This year's campaign has 3 clear main messages for customers: prepare, care and share. So prepare, it's making sure customers know what they're doing. It's caring, checking with people, your neighbours who might need that extra help and that assistance. And share, spread the word. Not everyone is aware of how these things operate, or you know, who to contact and who you can help with. So it's not just aimed at individual customers, but as I said at the start, we want to make sure that all of our stakeholders are engaged in this, from right the way across the board, how we're working on the ground, how we're working with our parliamentary contacts, and how they're working at a constituency level in terms of getting the word out to local people on the ground. So it's a really important facet of what we do, and it's brilliant, I think, that we've got the opportunity to really understand how all of this fits together, and ultimately, you know, share what we're trying to do and to hear from our stakeholders around that community. And I think one of the things that has improved greatly in terms of helping our preparation and looking at the resilience and performance of our infrastructure, such as upgrading our equipment, reinforcing lines, and looking at how we can bring in digital sensors and automation devices, that's all one thing. And it's obviously critical as to how we keep power and gas flowing, but it's also around how we understand weather forecasting and how we actually really have a handle on how these storms are going to develop. And so it's not just people like me who are sailors and who understand a little bit how storms work, etc., but it's also how we can really use that to forecast more effectively, and as I say, how we can use that to mobilize our teams of men and women across the country and make sure we're getting them to where help is needed as quickly as possible. So I think it's brilliant that, as well as the rest of the panel, we've got Dr. Emily Wallace on board from the Met Office. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Emily, not just from the sailing point of view and the weather forecasting, but I think it's a great job that you guys are doing. So thank you for that. So Barbara, I hope that has, between myself and Sandy, that's given a bit of a transatlantic picture of what networks are doing internationally, but also what networks are doing here in GB in particular, but across the United Kingdom. And hopefully that's framed where you want to take things. And hey, Emily, it's great that you're a fellow sailor too. So we can have a chat about that after the webinar. But I will now hand over to my colleague Barbara, who will now run the panel session. So over to you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Lawrence, and thank you very much, Sandra, as well. That introduction has teed us up perfectly for what I hope is going to be a really, really good panel session, given the calibre of the guests that we've chosen today. And Lawrence, just focusing a little bit on what you had to say, I actually checked out my 105, powercut105.com details today, not least because you and I were involved at Energy UK when this 105 service was being set up. So I just thought, oh, I'll check and see where it is at the moment. And I now know that I'm in Rota Block M, DNO code 15, should I need to use that information. And I also checked out the Priority Service Register. I thought I had registered my almost 97-year-old dad previously, but I hadn't. So that's all done and dusted this morning as well. So thank you very much to you and your colleagues across the industry who are running those services. It really is valuable. Thank you. So without further ado, let us say welcome to our panelists. My running order, I've got Brian, then Emily, then Paul, then Daniel. So I've checked all of the little biographies that I had here. and I've picked out a few snippets. I'm going to come to you first, Brian. Do a little bit of an introduction, and then you can tell us, add to that information yourself. I'll give you 5 minutes or so to warm the crowd up for us. So Brian is Head of Distribution Control Centre North for SSEN. He leads the team that operates the high and the low voltage distribution networks. He's got 800,000 customers dependent on him and his team, and they look at outages, which are both planned and unplanned, and the maintenance of the network. So Brian, would you like to take over from me now and introduce yourself a bit more and give us whatever messages you want as an opener? Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Barbara, and thanks everyone for your time today. I think Lawrence gave an excellent overview of the UK as a whole. So as Barbara said, I'm the head of the control centre for SSEN, covering our north of Scotland area. We do also have another licence area which covers central southern England. Between those both licence areas, we power almost 3.9 million customers. So although 800,000 of them in the north of Scotland, we do have quite a large chunk of customers in the south. And I think just to expand on some of the numbers that Lawrence discussed earlier, you know, from our own network point of view, we have over 800,000 of our customers registered in the Priority Service Register. And that's a key thing for us. You know, we're here to deliver for customers, and making sure we look after priority customers, particularly in a resilience frame, is really, really important to us. I think from a network point of view, you know, we cover in the north of Scotland, for example, 25% of the UK landmass. So from the areas and the remoteness, and I don't like to use the word remote because people in Scotland are only remote from their local village, right? So it's all relative. But if you compare that to the hustle and bustle of West London, central, south coast, you know, it's a really, really diverse piece of network. Customers' reliance on electricity and the services that we provide are very different in both areas, and we need to make sure that we cater for that across the year. So, you know, from an investment point of view, we're investing £100 million every year purely on resilience measures. So that's either upgrades or maintenance that we carry out across the networks. Interestingly, a large part of that is around tree cutting, so making sure that we clear any trees that are in proximity to overhead lines. And just last year, you know, we cut what we call a span. So we did 8,000 spans. So that's from pole to pole, which is the equivalent of sort of 600 kilometres of overhead line where we've cleared trees from. So you can see some of the measures that we're doing year on year to make sure that the network is as resilient as possible, and obviously making sure that we provide for our customers. Lawrence touched on a little bit on innovation and some of the things that go on around there. So there's lots of things that we've done over the years that we see are now business as usual. So we spoke about drones. We're looking at low voltage monitoring, smart metering, bedoings. All these things have come through the innovation world, which now help us manage the network on a day-to-day basis, but also allows us to provide a better service to customers. I've been in the control room here at SSEN for a number of years. You know, I've been around the group for 20 of those. I've seen quite a number of storms over the year. If we think back to Storm Arwen, I know Lawrence touched on it earlier, and the 7 storms of that year, we would say was unprecedented. Particularly Storm Arwen, we said was a once in a generation storm, and here we are already in November with Storm Ciarán, so the 3rd named storm of the year, and only just moving into it. So it just shows how the impact of the weather continues to impact the electricity networks. You know, from our own viewpoint, in the north of Scotland last week we had Storm Babette, and we managed to restore customers, a large portion of those customers, relatively quickly, using automation from the control centre, but obviously having teams out in the field. And as Lawrence touched on again, also the number of customers that we have off in our central southern England area today, 2,000 of them remain off supply, and we've managed to restore 25,000 since the faults came in late last night. So all in all, a busy time for network operators across the UK. It isn't just a winter programme, so we look at summer lightning, summer heat. All of these events are now becoming things that impact the electricity network, and we need to make sure that we're ready to respond to that, whichever that may be. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That was great. Now, we're moving over to Dr. Emily Wallace, Fellow in Weather and Climate Extremes and Impacts at the Met Office. I think that Emily is soon to become our phone a friend, because we are so dependent now on what is happening weather-wise. And if it wasn't because of the work that you and your colleagues do, Emily, we'd be lost. I'm really, really pleased that over the years that I've been involved in the energy sector, and there's quite a few, that we more closely collaborate with you and your colleagues. And that is one of the best things that's happened so far. Anyway, enough of me blabbering on. Please, Emily, you introduce yourself, pet.
Well, it's a wonderful introduction. Thanks so much. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here. As you point out, I think the collaboration between the Met Office and energy networks, energy system operators is absolutely critical at this time. It's a sector I've been in, but supplying weather and climate services for around about 10 years now, working with the ENA among other organisations. So yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. And there's a number of areas that I think are really ripe for further collaboration and further work. So the role I'm in currently is recognising that climate change is already upon us. Many people have already mentioned it this afternoon. So we're already dealing with extreme weather that's been intensified or made more likely by climate change. So some of the examples we've already mentioned, the heat wave in 2022 would have been almost impossible in pre-industrial times. The Scottish high rainfall totals from Babette and the storm at the beginning of October that preceded that are made more likely through climate change. So there's really high rainfall totals. We do expect that with a changing climate. So these impacts and these weather impacts are impacting all sectors, but I think it's particularly keenly felt in the energy sector, where there's such an enormous transition going on at the same time. So here the networks themselves are changing, the way in which the energy is generated is changing, and the way in which you can understand the demand signals is changing. And all of these, as you well know, are really all dependent on the weather. So there's two really critical areas that I hope we can focus on a little bit during the panel discussion and through conversation afterwards, particularly with the sort of audience that we have in the room today. So it's already been mentioned, network operators are spending billions of pounds on new infrastructure. New build is taking place, and I was interested to hear from Sandy about the US situation. In the UK, it's largely true that the design standards have not kept up with our changing climate. So this has been recognised by the National Infrastructure Commission. The Office for Nuclear Regulation do make their regulations such that they need to take climate change into account. But generally, in the rest of the industry, the standards haven't kept pace in many situations. So the weather files themselves are old. They're based on old science, so it's not reflecting the best we know about some of the hazards that the networks are facing. They're often delivered by old technology, so they're not very easy to use. And really critically, they don't always include climate change. So the impact of this is in some cases it's costing additional money to make network upgrades. So we've got a really good example of this with SSE and transmission, which without upgrading those design standards slows our progress to net zero. It's also obviously opening us up to potential future cost and reduced resilience if our networks aren't resilient to future hazards. So the other critical area, so the standards is one, the other critical area is around hazards that we're experiencing day on day. So in the new climate, with our networks using new technology, there are new threats that are more critical today than they have been previously. So, and often these are complex compound hazards from the meteorological point of view. So for example, overheating of power lines in low wind conditions in the summer, changes to ground saturation causing more hazard from strong winds, changes to wildfire conditions that could impact the networks. There's a real opportunity to work together to identify what these hazards are, and for us to be providing information that can give you the very earliest warning possible, so you can get your crews down from Scotland to support in the southwest, for example, like in the situation we're in at the moment. So thanks very much. That's all from me until the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now we're coming to Paul Sullivan, Head of System Capability and Risk System Operations at National Grid Transmission. And Paul, you deal with a whole new different kettle of fish, because you're dealing with things to do with LNG at Grain there, and you have been looking at CCS and energy storage and networks and future network management. So what are you bringing to the table today that we would be hanging on every word?
Well, let's find out. Thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon, everybody. As Barbara says, I've been in the industry quite a long time and moved around quite a few roles. This current role is really looking at the long term, primarily looking at the long term future of the methane network. But coupled with that is obviously trying to enable new technology, new innovation around CCUS and hydrogen. But my team also look at everything back towards the day as well. So really interesting to hear some of the comments about some of the early winter storms and how that's impacting. Yeah, we've been really focused this winter on making sure that we've maintained everything we need to maintain during the summer, and bringing everything back possible to make sure that actually the system is as robust as possible going into the winter from a gas transmission point of view, working with our DN colleagues, the distribution networks, to make sure that that cuts across to the supplies they have. Of course, we're dependent on other people to bring the gas to GB market. That includes our own indigenous continental shelf, but also LNG, as you mentioned, Barbara, and also imports across from Europe, which, as we know, over the last couple of years has been very volatile. And there's a lot of information out there about how that dramatic effect, or what dramatic effect that's had on the network and the operation of the network. And it sort of plays into then the longer term question of resilience. And I guess when I looked at the specification for today and thinking about what we might talk about, the long term resilience to the network is really key. It was interesting that Sandy raised the issue of gas for power, and how the resilience of the gas network in the US, and it's a mirror in GB, how that mirrors into actually security of supply, both on gas and gas consumption, but also power generation and electricity consumption. And it really is an integrated network and needs to be seen as such. And for that matter, from that point of view, we've got a lot of things happening around innovation, but interestingly, the future system operator coming along next year, and how that might take a central view to those planning questions. But of course, the transmission owners and the system operators are all responsible for the resilience and security of supply of their assets, and that's probably where I wanted to concentrate on, because clearly we've got methane today plays a great role, a really key role in the energy mix. A lot of people on the call will recognise these things, but gas is used for 85% of home heating. So 500,000 businesses. It's critical to keeping the lights on. I was looking this morning, and I think we're about 21% when I last looked of electricity generation is still from gas, and that's been up as high as 50% or more on a number of days over the last 12 months or so. And it is still critical, and making sure those things work in an integrated way. But that actually methane can play a part in the energy transition, primarily around the security of supply to the end consumer. The key is that we're going to go through quite a turbulent and volatile transition between energy vectors, and the challenge is how do we maintain that end user consumption that they rely on, not only in the winter, as everyone's made the point, but critically during the summer these days, because we see a lot of volatility in the summer months when demand is low, but we have high supplies. That was the story of last summer, really, of flows into Europe. So making sure that the resilience and the reliability and the availability of those assets are up where they currently are, and improve in some cases, is really, really important. The other thing I'd like to say, I guess, on resilience is, as we look forward, obviously, we have a lot of infrastructure in the ground, both in the transmission system and in the distribution system, that can really help with that journey towards net zero. And I think that plays into the argument around hydrogen. And how hydrogen may be that resilient fuel, that to replace hydrocarbon fuels in the future, but offer that dispatchable potential for generation, which we know is going to be so key as intermittent renewables may come and go. And I know Sandy was talking about storage, energy storage, electricity storage particularly, and that is really important. I think what we knew is we need a mix of all of those technologies and all of those sources to make sure that we maintain our energy security levels. I think the only thing then I'd like to finish with, I guess, is the asset base doesn't get there as a magic trick. We have hundreds, thousands of people making sure that our networks are secure. It needs investment, and there are some fundamental things that need to get done over the next decade to make sure that system can actually work properly and work efficiently, and make sure it can deliver what our customers need, what our consumers need, and make sure that's an energy secure, safe and reliable network. And that's the main driver, really. But yes, as everyone said, really looking forward to the questions and the challenges, and it'd be good to have the debate. So thanks.
Excellent.
Back to you, Barbara.
Yeah, and thank you for that reminder about questions. As you sat there listening to everyone who's logged in today, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, if you please just submit it into the chat, and I will attempt to multitask and read through those, and we will ask our panelists. I've got a few warmer up questions to sort of get them going, but I will introduce our final panelist at the moment, who is Daniel Stevens. Daniel's in a very nice location. Are you in New York? That's what it says in your bio. Lovely, very nice. Another phone a friend, or just if you wanted to pop over and call in on him, I'm sure you would be allowed. So Daniel, you've had a fantastic past. You've previously you were global utility lead for crisis management and resilience at Accenture, and then you worked at the US federal government at the Department of Homeland Security, including working as a senior policy advisor for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Wow, that sounds very high-powered. Very nice. But now, to beat it all, you're the Group Vice President for Business Resilience and Crisis Management over there in the USA. Can I hand over to you? Are you gobsmacked? Oh dear.
That's a very kind intro.
To introduce yourself, Pat. Off you go.
Thank you. That's a very kind intro. But behind the scenes, the truth is I have geographic commitment issues, and I've moved quite a bit, but I've certainly enjoyed all of those different roles. And I'd say the time at FEMA doing response work has been one of the most exciting, but as we heard during our opening remarks, as an industry, I would argue at a very strategic level, this is also one of the most exciting roles to be in, and one of the most exciting environments for all of us to operate in today. Is we're really involved firsthand in what is, I'd say, one of the most significant industry transformations that any of us have experienced. And that would be an exciting role for anyone, but obviously at National Grid we have quite a significant footprint in the UK, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But the role I have is a group role, so it also includes our US footprint. So for those who are unaware, we have both gas and electricity networks in the New England region, so that includes New York and Massachusetts, and then our National Grid Ventures, or NGV, operations. We do have some renewable energy generation sources across the Midwest and West Coast as well. The way that we look at resilience here is quite holistic. We tend to refer to it as a systems-based approach, which means that obviously at the core, we're looking at our network or operational resilience, but we also consider things like our IT and operational technology, or OT infrastructure. We look at things like security, both cyber and physical. And one of the things that I think is sometimes just not stated enough is the importance of the workforce. And as we go through an energy transition, such as the one that we're in, we're looking at massive transition in the types of skills, both in technology, but also engineering, legal, permitting, etc. It's really a remarkable thing to plan for, but recognize that we have to watch the workforce needs and demands to align with that transition as well. So the idea of resilience for us is completely interdependent across our functions of the company, and also dependent on some of the other infrastructure and assets that we rely on, specifically telecommunications networks, transportation networks. And so we kind of see this as, again, the core being our operational network resilience, but really a need to look at this holistically because without all of these things having some degree of resilience, whether that's redundancy or additional capacity or strategic planning, forethought, they have to work in unison. I'd say one of the best examples of what this looks like in practice for us is actually what we're doing leading up to our kind of winter readiness campaign. Taking that same approach of both strategic and operational. At this strategic level, we're looking at things like the war in Ukraine, the civil unrest in the Middle East. What does that mean, not just as potential impacts to us, but also geopolitical instability, markets and commodity prices, what's happening globally. There's also been subsea surveillance activities that is in public domain now in the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea. So we're looking strategically around what's happening to the industry as a whole, and what does that mean for commodity prices, security of supply, adequacy, etc. So that's one element that we help to use and shape our engagement strategy with US government, UK government, but also EU stakeholders. We're looking and working closely with some of the upstream gas producers and providers in the US as well. We have our colleagues from National Gas. We look very closely at their winter outlooks as well as the ESO winter outlooks, which gives really well-defined different climate or weather scenarios for us for contingency planning. And then, operationally, I'd say we're doing the same things that we do every year in terms of, asset performance testing, maintenance checks, looking at our training and exercises that we do in build up to the winter, and making sure that operationally we're operating at full capacity. And all of that comes together in two different task force groups that we have. One is the US task force and the other is the US, that takes all of these elements, corporate affairs, IT, security, our operational network owners, and we meet on a routine basis, and every one of those meetings starts with a weather outlook. And Emily, you'll be excited to hear that we have started this many months ago with, obviously in the summer, we're not looking at the forecast so much as our long-term, long-range kind of predictions for the winter and what's happening with El Nino and what's, atmospheric temperatures may affect the climate for the winter. So it really starts for us early on in the summer in terms of what and how we operate, because the idea of resilience is obviously the ability to anticipate and prepare, but it's for both incremental change, things like climate change, but also these short-term disruptions, whether that's a severe storm or a cyber breach. How do we have the capacity to quickly anticipate, prepare, and respond? So I'm looking forward to the conversation today and hearing from some of my peers as well.
Oh, Daniel, that was fantastic. Honestly, you just covered the whole lot there nearly. It's absolutely great. I'm going to come back to the panelists now and ask a couple of questions. And as I say, I'll open it out to our audience as well. But I think because you covered such a wide spread of issues there, Daniel, I wouldn't mind asking Brian and Paul about your challenges around things that are covered by your network, but also linking into what Daniel just said. You will be aware that there's the E3C committee that reports up to COBRA. I used to be a member of E3C, so I know that they look at things like pandemic and resilience and cyber issues. And then Emily, you've got the weather input to those sort of government committees that are set up to sort of pull the whole thing together. Brian, if I could ask you, what are your major issues that you're seeing to do with those types of issues: pandemic resilience, cyber, skills, security of supply? And what sort of message would you say to the government is most important for them to help us to help all of their constituents and the public within the UK?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. Yeah, so E3C I'm a member of from an electricity perspective, and we cover cross industry, a number of the things that you've spoke about there. I think, looking at threats of cyber, we've got a subcommittee of E3C that looks at the cyber. We've got the electricity subcommittee. And I think it's important that we all learn from each other. We're all in the same game, and whether you do gas, electricity, water, I think that cross industry working is really, really important, because if I think about what happened to SEPA in the north of Scotland, for example, we learnt an awful lot when SEPA had a cyber security issue, and they lost all of their systems. They weren't able to provide lots of their common services. So I think that was a real wake up, I think, across lots of industries around, what are you doing around cybersecurity in particular. I think just touching on the point of skill set, we spoke, I think someone mentioned people, and that's a massive, massive part for us. If we think about the skill set of the people that we need across this industry, and I speak, quite heartedly about, control engineers, for example. They're a very small bunch of people that have a unique skill set, and we're all looking for them. So as we move into a sort of net zero world, microgrids, utility operators around the world, I think it's an important group of people that we need to continue to invest in. Same with protection and control, and into SCADA and sort of communication type activities. I think these are key issues that probably we've underinvested for a number of years, not just in the UK, I think across the world, and we're seeing that real gap there, and trying to get ahead and early so that you've got that pipeline of young people coming through the industry is really, really important. And I think the ask, from government is really to get behind us. We don't normally come and ask for things that we don't need, and what we're asking for is for governments and local authorities to get behind us and support the sort of priority service register stuff that we're doing to make sure we can look after vulnerable people, making sure we can invest in the right areas, get a pipeline of trainees and apprenticeships and these types of things coming through organisations, not just ourselves, but across all sectors.
Yeah, thank you. Important messages there. Paul, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I echo most of what Brian said there. I think it's really important. I think, and maybe breaking it down into just maybe 2 or 3 sort of areas. So cyber, I think, has been talked about quite a lot. We're really conscious of that. We've seen and talked to a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people across the world around cyber resilience and how you sensibly protect systems. And I guess linked to the people point, people clearly are our biggest asset. That they can, they definitely make the organisation, and they will make that organisation successful and deliver the end result, which is, in our case, gas to the consumer. But unfortunately, they do in some cases represent the biggest weakness in things like cyber, because there's so many of them, and so many approaches can be made. So it is one of those things that there's an education piece around cyber, I think, for everybody, the general public as well as direct employees. We have to be really, really vigilant, and obviously today's sort of political environment around the world makes it slightly worse, but I think it is clearly an ever-present issue that we need to pick up on. The other thing for the organisation is we exercise this a lot. We look at how the protocols work. We look at what will happen, how we would operate the business securely and efficiently if we were to lose systems or lose access to buildings or whatever it may be in that physical security sense. So there's definitely that going on as well to make sure that we can continue to supply. Obviously, worst case scenario on cyber is parts of the network are affected, and that's also starting to be exercised now as well, and that's proving, as you'd imagine, a challenge. But we're making real headway in that and making that as resilient as possible. The thing on security supply, I guess, just generally, you mentioned E3C. Obviously, we report into that through the Network Emergency Coordinator, of which I am one within National Gas. And I think it's quite interesting the way that works in terms of coordinating across all the industry, and the role that the NEC takes in trying to maintain the system as safe as possible is a real key one. And we can get tied up, I think, in thinking about winter and all those sorts of things. It's absolutely right, but the reality is you have to think about this in a sense of the person in their house in the middle of the winter, that's what we're trying to preserve against. And I think we have a very good culture in the organization about thinking about the individual and thinking about the implication that will have, and that brings it home really well to some people in the organization that have not maybe worked at the distribution level where you're dealing with customers. I'm fortunate years ago I did that, and working in the field is a real it's quite a humbling experience, but actually it's really educational, and dealing with people in that circumstance is really important, I think. So working on that security supply piece, and then just picking up on the last point of Brian's is investment. I think and this probably fits with government and the regulator, to be fair, as Brian says, we're sensible organizations. We look at this very critically, and we want to bring forward really credible investments, and we want to make sure we're doing that for the right reasons, and what we need is the right policy framework and the right environment itself to make sure that security supply is really being focused in on. And that's important in our work with the FSO and the like. But I think it's making sure that they're looking at this through the right lens, which is, if you've got a future scenario that's credible, then you should protect against it, and protecting against it may mean investing in those assets that will really make sure that security supply is there. So there's a few thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Emily, over to you.
Thank you. So I suppose the focus with government for me would probably be around really promoting that future look into resilience against future climates. I mentioned it already in terms of one of the things would be around standards, but also just the organisations thinking about how their operations will have to change into the future as our climate changes. Thinking about security of supply for the winter ahead, there is information that can be used by operators out to a few months. So Daniel highlighted ENSO earlier on. ENSO, the El Nino, which is a warm water welling up in the tropical Pacific, actually does influence our weather as well. There was a forecast we gave to energy sector a couple of days ago, actually, which many of you may have attended. And at the moment, that would be making it more likely to have this very stormy, unsettled conditions. As that changes through the winter, it's going to be really critical for government to be keeping tabs on what information we can be providing on security of supply, because it will be changing, and that information does go out further than just a few days. And finally, it's come up a couple of times in different ways, but collaboration, I think, in this space is absolutely critical. Yes. Networks can fail, not because the equipment itself is the biggest problem, but for example, the transport getting to that equipment can be the problem. So collaboration, not just within the industry, but with the sort of sectors who are serving the energy industry. So that would be transport, health, and humans moving around in particular, that actually working together to understand what the protocols need to be in extreme situations is really part of that picture of remaining resilient.
Thank you. That's really important. Thanks. Daniel, I wonder if there's anything from the American experience that you would maybe sort of pass on to our government to be the most important thing that you've found helpful from their perspective.
Fair question. I think, as I was listening to the others speak, what I was coming to mind was actually some of the things taking place on UK government, but they're quite similar to what we're doing in the US. And the challenges and opportunities for government involvement are also quite similar. So let me start with some of the UK elements. Recently, the updated National Risk Register was published, and there's some discrete risks in there for energy sector, both gas and electricity. But if you were to do a word search in the risk register for energy, it appears throughout many of the risks. So one of the opportunities that I think we need to work together on is, where are the forums for us to do the cross-industry collaboration and identify collaboratively what the right risk mitigation strategies are. Yeah. And there's also that's one of the kind of themes that was published in the UK resilience framework as well, was the importance of cross-sector collaboration, and as well as from community and private sector and academia engagement. And that's the same in the US. There was our White House recently published a climate resilience framework, which talks a lot about cross-industry collaboration. So I think there's an opportunity there to kind of leverage the platform of government to bring stakeholders together and have these discussions, because right now we're quite siloed. We have our own regulatory authorities, where we have our own stakeholder groups and industry forums that we work with, but very few of these bring telecoms, healthcare, transportation together to talk about, maybe a focused scope around, increased electrification demand or something to that effect. What can we do together? So that's one area I'd say is both US and UK. Involvement of academia. There's an enormous amount of research that in all aspects, cybersecurity, renewables, hydrogen, etc. And I think sometimes, that it's not that it's wasted. It's just we need to find better ways of taking that and applying it to real world needs and taking the learnings out of academia. And that goes for the workforce demands that we're seeing as well. Very few people in university or college think about the energy industry as a place, of exciting opportunity. And whether you're in a legal profession or an engineer or in communications, there's so much that we're doing, which is really exciting. And I think we could promote that more effectively. The last piece, and that's both US, UK, the last piece where I do see a little bit of difference, although Lawrence, you made references to this in your opening comments, which were great. And I'm pulling from some of my FEMA experience, which is the Emergency Management Agency. There's a really big platform in the US around the importance of local community-based resilience and local sort of, I want to say, almost accountability on the role of the community to be prepared, to have a communication plan in place, to be aware of the types of weather hazards that you face, and what do you do in a power outage, and how, making sure that you're taking care of your neighbors or your elderly, or you have pets, if you have medically dependent, household members, if you have people with English as a second language or other vulnerabilities, how do you make sure that, the first few hours of an outage, you don't become desperately in need. And I think there's an increase of that through the local resilience forums in the UK, but to really speak more vocally around the importance of sort of self-resilience and community-based resilience, we're going to see more severe weather events. We're going to see more prolonged outages. And even with the most effective resilient networks and the most effective response and recovery strategies in place, we as a society need to expect and be prepared for those types of disruptions. And I think we need to speak more publicly about that.
Oh, honestly, you're saying all the right things, Daniel. Yeah, we need to get across there to that New York office and have a look and see what else is got for us.
Anytime. You are welcome to come to New York anytime.
You heard it here first, everyone. Right. Okay, so I'm going to open the floor very shortly because I can see, I've seen there Alan Whitehead's in the audience. So Alan, I'm just warming you up a bit because I'm going to come to you. But as a quick final message, is there anything that you would like, any message you would like to give to the parliamentarians that they could take back to their constituents that would be of value at a time like this? Paul, shall I come to you first?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for that question. I mean, I think it obviously, as National Gas, we have really quite a long distance relationship with the consumer and certainly into constituents. But I think there is quite a lot, as Daniel was just saying there, that actually organisations can do locally. I mean, we're active in the community, but actually looking at things like how people prepare is probably the key message we would probably give as an organisation, I think, is looking at, in those worst case scenarios, how do you prepare? So having obviously the obvious things around insulation, using less energy generally, but the question really is how do you prepare for those peak periods when, if we are in the situation where you're going to lose power, hopefully not gas, but if you're losing power, how do you prepare for that? How do you then deal with that circumstance and that self-reliance, as well as understanding who you talk to, and making sure your contacts are up to date and making sure that you're your registration on the Power Cut 105 is right. Those types of things are very, very sensible precautions ahead of any period of any. Sorry, probably better.
Thank you. Emily, anything from a weather point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really key audience to us talking to the public. So the purpose of the Met Office is to help you, everyone, to make good decisions to stay safe and thrive. As I say, the public is a really key part of that. So we work with partners at a cross sector to support the messaging. So a bit like Daniel was saying, that the community action is absolutely key. And what we've started to do more and more at the Met Office is to provide very specific advice on with our partners on what action individuals can take. So there's a campaign called Weather Ready. So I'd encourage constituents to Google that, Met Office Weather Ready, and in there you can find what they describe as weather hacks, different ways to prepare for power cuts over the winter, how to maintain vehicles, etc., all the sort of things that you might need to do ahead of a winter season.
Thank you, that's excellent. Brian, any last messages before we open the floor?
Yes, similar themes, Barbara. So the big one for us is that priority service register. That's really, really key for us to get the vulnerable people. One of the things that we've spoken about, particularly over the last 2 winters when we were potentially discussing an energy shortage, was that people who are maybe not used to being vulnerable, they don't think they're vulnerable. So it's about getting that message out to really think about what would you do in a particular situation. You know, if the lights do go out for a period of time or for an extended period of time. And I think, again, similar to Emily, you know, we're doing our winter campaign, so, you know, promote that as much as you can locally with constituents, and really support the message that we're trying to get out there, which is one of be prepared, similar to what Daniel was saying. You know, a heavy reliance on local and personal resilience is important, because in times of extreme weather, you know, we won't be able to meet every single person's needs at that particular time. So there's a heavy reliance on that local and personal resilience.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. Any last messages, Daniel, before I open the floor?
Well, sure. I guess 2 is, one, we would really like to be a part of and see more conversations around resilience standards. And this speaks a little bit to what Emily was saying earlier. A lot of our design standards are looking backwards. What are the historical wind rates, extreme weather, temperature fluctuations? But if we're building forward looking, we need to be looking at what the future weather patterns are going to look like, and extreme heat and extreme colds and precipitation and wind. So we're doing that independently, but we'd like to be working with regulators, with government, with our peers, and saying, how can we come up with resilience standards that are fair and equitable, realistic, you know, but also taking into account the forward-looking climate. That's one. And then the second, which is be more tactical in nature, but you know, we've historically put a lot of emphasis on winter readiness and winter. And Emily, I'm looking to you to back me up on this, but I see extreme heat as maybe the biggest risk looking forward. And I know here in the US, we had an interesting conversation with one of the New York City commissioners who pointed out that New York City has more fatalities annually as a result of extreme heat than any other severe weather event. And I know in the UK, there's a lot less prevalence of air conditioning. And so I would see that as something we as a community need to think more about.
Thank you. That's really good advice and good points made there. Okay, so Alan Whitehead, I'm calling you. I did give you a bit of a hint that I was coming your way. Would you like to ask questions of the panel, please? Are you there? Hello? Can anybody see if he's still there? Oh, I had him on screen before. Oh, he is there.
He's on. I think he might be on mute, though.
Yeah. Oh, he's just taken himself off mute. Hello, Alan? No. Unfortunately, I'm dealing with a laptop that won't allow me to go to another screen. Oh, I wonder if No, I can't page down like that. No, well, until we find out how to get Alan on, we definitely can't hear him. So, okay, I'll continue with a few questions, and maybe Daniel, Cleland, you're behind the scenes. If you could maybe see if you can sort out a spot for Alan Whitehead, that would be really, really helpful. Thank you. Now then, I had questions about fault monitoring and weather forecasting technology, which has improved tremendously over the past few years. What innovative solutions are you working on or seeing emerge at the moment? Would anybody like to have a jump in on that one? Brian?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can go. We're actually through the SIF Ofgem SIF funding, strategic innovation funding. We're actually partnering with Scottish Power Energy Networks, and we're working on a product called Predict for Resilience. So this is about taking weather forecasting and trying to get to a position that we can almost pinpoint the faults before they happen. So taking that high resolution weather data and trying to translate that into network fault activity. Now, one of the challenges that we have, and I'm sure Emily and other colleagues will say the same, is that the forecast is only a forecast. It's not a prediction, or it's not going to be what it actually turns out. So what we're hoping to do through this project is actually use the base forecast that we get and actually play some tunes with that to say, well, what if the wind speed increased by 5 miles per hour, or what if the probability of that wind was to go from 50% to 90%, and then actually using that to make some really informed choices. And I say that with the view that, particularly in the north of Scotland, where we see lots of extreme weather, the big challenge for us is getting people to the islands, so Shetland, Orkney, the Western Isles. You know, we've got to be doing that ahead of time, and particularly when you talk about ferry or travel disruption getting to those islands, because once the weather comes, you might not have another opportunity to get people here. And we saw that last year with the extreme snow that we had in Shetland, and just getting people to the island. You know, it's an overnight ferry from Aberdeen, and I've said before, you know, the closest train station to Lerwick is in Bergen in Norway. So it just shows you how far away it is from the Scottish mainland, and it becomes a logistical challenge more than a sort of network resilience challenge.
Wow, yeah, that's true. Emily, anything to?
Yeah, it feels like a good point to follow that comment there. So I suppose one of the really exciting things going on at the Met Office at the moment is that we're just preparing for a new supercomputer. So that's going to be a £1.2 billion investment in our supercomputing capability, which means there's going to be a huge upgrade into the quality and quantity of information that we can be supplying. So it's a really great point at which to be working with us to better predict, as Brian said, some of the conditions that could cause the faults on the networks, including using information, probabilistic information. So the sort of information that Brian was talking about, our models can already provide envelopes of possibility for the conditions we're going to see, and using that full range of information is absolutely critical. The other aspect, I think, is ripe for more work, and again, I've encouraged organisations to get in touch with us to work together on this, is identifying the sort of compound hazards that could cause the greatest problems for us. So Arwen was a great example. The winds were coming from a different direction to they often do, but that actually was another situation where they're also coming from the east. But Arwen, the reason we think that the trees blew over to such an extent and caused the problems they did was because we were getting that easterly wind. So what we need to be predicting and working together on are some of these more subtle hazards that perhaps weren't so obviously a problem previously. So yes, absolutely. I think this predicting for faults is a really growing area. Actually, I see a few projects going on in that area at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Daniel, have you anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we've been experimenting with some pretty innovative technology on our distribution network. It's called FLISR, which is an acronym. It stands for fault location service restoration, I believe. And
Right.
so I guess to put this into context, it's helpful to understand what happens today, and then how Flizzr can help with mitigating some customer impacts. So earlier on the call, an example was given around a tree falling on a distribution line, and if that line relays or sends a signal that there's a disruption, what happens today is that entire circuit is often de-energized until we can pinpoint exactly what the cause of disruption was, and where on the circuit it took place. So if you have 500 customers on that circuit, that means they're all out of power, even though the isolated location is just one tree branch. So Flizzr is an ability for us that sends automated signals and controls back to the control room, and can actually position the reclosures so they re-energize the portion of the distribution circuit that is not affected by that tree. So there's one example, and I can't remember the name of the weather event we had not too long ago, but we had something like 1,000 customers out, and within 20 seconds, half of those were restored.
Wow.
Whereas that normally would have taken the full, I think it was about a 2-hour restoration time. So it's not completely embedded in our network today, but it's something that's clearly going to enable faster restoration for customers.
Yeah, thank you. Flizzr, we'll remember that one.
Good
Paul.
Yeah, I'd probably call out, I mean, it's not quite fault monitoring, but one of the things that affects the national transmission system is really how we monitor from the air, encroachment. So people, farmers, builders, whatever it might be, the public encroaching on the network, because obviously we have a lot of above ground installations, but the majority of it is underground and just signed by high pressure markers. And so we used to walk the line years ago. Now into recent times we flew the line in a helicopter. I think someone mentioned drones earlier. We've experiencing use of drones in some locations, but one of the things we've been trying to have a look at with some third parties is actually that monitoring from satellite. And the use of the satellite coupled with AI technology to actually analyze those pictures as they come in, to actually understand whether day on day or week on week those pictures are changing. So is a builder getting closer? Is something happening? Has something happened on that line? And when you see some of the terrible videos that go the rounds on social media about people hitting even a 2-bar pressure line, somebody hitting a 70 or 80 bar pressure line, would be, very, very serious, not only for the downstream network, but for the individuals involved. And so anything we can do to make that much more timely and our intervention much more direct is very good. So we're looking at that. And I think the use of general AI technology across the piece, but in this example is some of my generation is just amazing. But interestingly, we have a bunch of data scientists internally now trying to push us on the operational side of the business well, and using AI to look at demand forecasting in the short term. We produce a 5-day demand forecast based on the weather, but translated into weather correction for demand. And that use of AI and self-learning is amazing, and I think it is definitely a direction of travel for the industry generally. But in those places where the uncertainties are there, AI is very helpful for dealing with some of those uncertainties, explaining them. So a couple of areas on technology, but the fault one, or the flying the line is a really innovative one. I think we're really excited by.
Great. I was wondering how long it would be before somebody said AI. So you win the prize, Paul.
Excellent.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions in the chat line. So the first is from Andrew Jenkin, which I don't know if you've read, but do you think energy flexibility services would allow for more resilient power grid, and could these kind of services allow for microgrids to become more established? Microgrids, that's the key, isn't it? That's one of the things we're all talking about. Who would like to take this one on?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up that as a starter. So flexibility, I mean, we've been using flexibility in the north of Scotland for a number of years now. So if I can give you a real life example, on the island of Islay, which is on the west coast of Scotland, we have a small hydro substation there, which is owned by another customer. And we use that to almost peak lop, particularly in times in the summer where Islay becomes a tourist hotspot, or in the winter when demands increase. So I think flexibility is massive, and we are obviously have a call out quite regularly to look at ways of flexibility, flexing the network, rather than just a straight build from a sort of asset point of view. And I apologize, I'm going to jump into the next question, and I think it's very similar. And I think one of the projects that have been ongoing with the ESO recently and Scottish Power is the Distributed Restart project. So this is about how can you restart the transmission system from a distribution connected generator, so small scale, whether it be a hydro, solar, battery, or that type of technology, or any technology. But I think the traditional top-down approach is no longer there, and I think microgrids, local energy systems are probably key for the future. One to give us flexibility in how we operate the network. But I think it basically speeds up that transition, so you're not waiting always on full scale upgrades or reinforcement. So it allows people to decarbonise much quicker, and I think it's a real opportunity for us.
Mm-hmm. Paul, does this have any impact?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I mean, obviously from a resilient power grid, obviously that I'd love to say yes. I know quite a lot about electricity, but possibly not enough to answer that direct question. But flexibility services generally, when we talk about how consumers can play an active part in balancing networks, whether it be microgrids or nationally, actually, I think there is a role there, and we have services already out there, both on electricity, as everyone knows, and gas. And there are a couple of trials going on as we turn into 2024 to look at how maybe gas can look at what we call non-daily meters, so close to a domestic load being aggregated to offer some flexibility back. So I think in a general principle sense, I think that the active consumer part of that is a really good positive step forward. I can't really comment on the microgrid question. I'm not sure it may, I'll probably be told otherwise, but I'm not sure it applies necessarily to the gas system. Locally, you'd have to, the analogy would be, say, a biomethane site locally that had a discrete network. It's not really how the gas network has been developed, so it may be a step to take, but certainly the resilience point and the flexibility services is absolutely key.
Yeah. Daniel, anything to add?
Yeah, I think for microgrids to really take off, we're going to need to see some transformative change on energy storage, and I think we will. So I definitely foresee that as a means of resilient power in the future. The question in my mind is, will that be at a residential level, or will it be aggregated at a community-based level? So essentially being able to store localized energy within a community versus your home. Either way, the other piece of this, if you're truly going to more of a microgrid structure in the across the country, you're now dealing with very localized fluctuation in supply and demand, and a lot more technology that's needed to help balance and maintain reliability. I could see a world in which the consumer or the customer is much more connected and aware of their real-time demand. So in essence, just like we get an extreme weather alert, you might get an alert that says, don't do your laundry now, or turn down your heating now, because, there's an imbalance. It's very localized. Will that happen? I don't know, but you would almost need that very localized real-time understanding to have a degree of reliability coupled with adequate energy storage.
There are some players in this market who are sort of looking to go in that type of direction. So it's coming. And I mean, we started off years ago in France. They had the red, white and blue system, didn't they? So at some points on a weekend when there's no industry drawing off the power, they say to everyone, go and fill your boots, get your dishwasher on and your washing machine and your tumble dryer, because we've got all this nuclear power and it's got nowhere to go. So yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Right. Okay. We're into our last 5 minutes. Just very short and quickly, I'll run around the panel to see if you have any last minute points you'd like to make. And Emily, I would like to start with you. Is there anything we've missed today that you would have liked to touch upon?
No, it's been a great opportunity to talk about the role of weather and climate within the energy networks. I've been really pleased to hear how frequently it's been recognised that climate are a really key resilience issue. So just to conclude, I suppose, to say, you know, you're all very aware that the climate projections are there to support us to plan for the future. So do get in touch if you want support using those for excess growing of grass, as someone put in the chat, or for the critical resilience factors as well. And thinking about the warning that we're able to get on these kind of storms, we can be giving information out several weeks ahead of when we might be expecting these kind of conditions. So thanks so much for having me, and now I'll leave it to the next panel member.
Thank you. Brian, do you want to go next? I'm just going around my screen like that.
Yeah, no, really good discussion, and it's really nice to hear some of the things that we have in common, but also some of the things that we can learn from each other. I think Daniel touched on the work we are doing, or maybe not doing, in academia, and I think, you know, Project Leo for us was a real great example of that. So again, touching on that microgrid, local energy, but using academia to help push on in the energy transition. But no, nothing other than that. But thanks very much for the time today. It's been really, really good, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you very much for turning up. Paul, over to you.
Problem with coming off mute. Yes, so probably the key, I guess, is what I think today's demonstrated is how integrated the network is, and by network I mean everything from the consumer all the way up to production, including global production when we talk about gas supplies for sure. And I think there's a need to look at that as a whole system, and probably one of the things is the scenario that goes along the planning route. So how do you design these networks? How do you make them resilient? How do you decide where your investment is? How do you make sure that actually we are resilient to short-term issues and long-term issues like changes in supply and demand? And that really needs some robust thinking about which scenarios you use, and therefore, is it a policy scenario, i.e. we need to get to this point by this date, what do you need to believe? Or is it actually a planning scenario where you've got assets and you need to plan forward for their use, and potentially in hydrogen sense it's reuse? And so there's a whole piece in there about the scenario you're planning for, so that everybody can prepare properly, I think is probably the key element on my list that we didn't get to, but that's great. But thank you for the opportunity to talk, and thanks to the other panelists. Really interesting.
Thank you. Daniel, over to you for the final short statement.
Sure. Well, I echo Paul's comments. A huge thank you to the other panelists, to you, Barbara, for facilitating so exceptionally well. I guess I would leave with just while we're faced with a lot of different challenges across the industry, I'd put the challenge back to everyone on the call as well, to think big, and to don't sell yourself short. We all need to work together on this. There are going to be some very creative solutions, things that we just haven't thought of and don't even have visibility of yet. So we need to work together, think big, be bold, and hopefully we'll work through all of it together.
Cool, that's magnificent. Well, what a note to end on. I have got some thank yous, and then I just want to say I'm so pleased the words collaboration came out. Prepare, care and share. What a catchy logo. That's got to be a winner chicken dinner, Lawrence and his team. 105, yeah, that's an absolutely fantastic. powercup105.com and the Priority Services Register. Be kind, look after your fellow neighbours, tell them all about these initiatives, tell them where they should go to check up on things. And before I finally sign off, Lawrence, please make sure you say thank you to your fantastic team who've been great in organising today. Daniel and Josh, fantastic job. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. If you have any more questions, please follow up, because it all helps. Every comment and every nudge helps us do a better job. Thank you. All the best, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Do you want to
Thank
hang
you.
on for a minute? Yeah. Oh, he's gone. Yeah. That flew over. Absolutely.